Victoria has hundreds of panther stories. The official evidence review kept pointing back to a much smaller cat. For more than a century, people across Victoria have reported long, black, low-slung animals slipping across roads, paddocks, and forest tracks. The stories are not confined to one valley or one decade. By 2012, the state review said reports numbered in the thousands and stretched back more than 100 years. That sounds impressive until you ask a different question. What kind of evidence survives when the animal is no longer a silhouette in bad light? In May 2012, Victoria's Minister for Agriculture and Food Security asked for a science-based assessment of the available material. Researchers Peter Menkhorst and Lee Morrison from the Arthur Rylah Institute went through government files, community collections, photographs, tracks, carcass reports, and attempts at DNA identification. Their conclusion was not that every witness was wrong, it was more precise. The available evidence was inadequate to establish a wild population of exotic big cats, and the lack of primary evidence made such a population highly unlikely. There is another detail that matters. Panther is not a scientific species name. In these stories, it usually means a black leopard, sometimes a jaguar, or simply a large unidentified cat. That looseness makes the legend easy to expand. The investigation therefore asked a harder question than did someone see something strange? It asked what physical animal could actually account for the evidence, and one ordinary species kept surviving that test. Felis catus, the domestic cat living wild. The review also separated another question that folklore tends to merge. Could an individual exotic cat have escaped at some point, possibly? Could Victoria support a hidden, self-sustaining population for generations without producing decisive biological evidence? That was the claim the investigators considered highly unlikely. 3. This matters because the legend often grows by accumulation. A black shape in the Otways, a track in Gippsland, and a livestock kill in the Grampians can feel like 3 pieces of one puzzle. Scientifically, they remain 3 separate events until evidence connects them. The 2012 review did not treat every clue equally. It built an evidence ladder. At the top was primary evidence, a body, bone, tooth, fur, or DNA from a source whose origin could be established. Below that came secondary evidence, photographs, video, recorded sounds, and eyewitness sightings. At the bottom came signs such as footprints, scats, scratch marks, and prey carcasses. Those signs can become powerful if they yield reliable DNA, but by themselves, they usually identify a possibility, not an animal. That distinction changes the whole Victoria story. 1,000 sightings do not automatically add up to one specimen. The review had plenty to examine. Community groups had accumulated large databases. Government files contained decades of reports. The Australian Animal Folklore Collection preserved photographs, correspondence, and alleged signs. Some cases were striking. In December 2005, 2 clear tracks, photographed on a sandy road in Longford Pine Plantation, were considered highly likely to have been made by a cat, and their reported dimensions were larger than the reviewers thought a domestic cat could explain. They still could not identify the species from those prints alone. The stronger problem was what never appeared. Museum Victoria held about 24,000 catalogued mammal specimens collected in the state, with no unknown large felid among them. The Victorian Biodiversity Atlas held more than 160,000 mammal records. Researchers had also examined many tens of thousands of motion-triggered camera images from remote forests, including hundreds of feral cats, wild dogs, and foxes, without producing an exotic big cat. One Grampian study alone accumulated about 1,840 camera trap nights while targeting foxes and cats and recorded no unexpected species. This is where absence becomes evidence. A breeding population is not one animal passing through once. It has to eat, breed, die, leave bones, leave roadkill, appear on cameras, and eventually enter somebody's collection. The review standard was severe because the claim was severe. An unexplained track could remain unexplained. That did not make it a leopard track. The report also stressed that no felid is native to Australia. The only cat recognized as having established a wild, self-sustaining population is the domestic cat, so any leopard, puma, or jaguar claim starts with an extra burden. It must explain not just one sighting, but the origin and persistence of an introduced population. That is why provenance matters so much. A hair in a bag is not automatically a leopard record. Investigators need to know where it came from, who handled it, whether the sample could have been contaminated, and whether another laboratory can repeat the result. 4. The most interesting evidence was not the blurry material. It was the material that came closest to becoming primary evidence. In June 2005, in central Gippsland, Kurt Engel shot a very large black cat. Photographs circulated widely, but only the tail was retained. The Department of Sustainability and Environment arranged DNA testing on a skin sample at Monash University. The sequence showed 97.7 to 100% identity with domestic cat and only 87% with leopard. The retained tail measured 65 centimeters, unusually long, but the reviewers noted that skinning can stretch straight tail. Their conclusion was blunt. This was a particularly large Felis catus. Then there was Winchelsea. In November 1991, a large scat collected north of the Otway Ranges was sent to expert Barbara Triggs. She extracted black hairs and found that some resembled hair from a black leopard at Melbourne Zoo. A second expert, Hans Brunner, examined later hares blind and thought they were probably domestic cat, while refusing to exclude a larger panther-like animal. Years later, Dr. Stephen Frankenberg at La Trobe University tested mitochondrial DNA from the stored hairs. The sequence matched the corresponding leopard sequence across the region tested except for one nucleotide. On paper, that sounds explosive. It never became the proof the legend needed. Frankenberg told the reviewers the result was not 100% reliable because a small possibility of contamination remained. Leopard hairs had been present in the workshop where the material was handled. The finding stayed unpublished, and the sample's chain of provenance could not carry the weight of proving an exotic population. A separate South Gippsland genetics project tested saliva from attacked sheep. 2 of 12 samples showed canine DNA, none showed feline DNA, and the researchers still called the exercise inconclusive because contamination in access by farm dogs could not be ruled out. This is the uncomfortable part of real investigation. The strongest clues can become weaker when examined more carefully. That is not the same as proving they were meaningless. It means the evidence stopped one step short of identification. There was a cautionary lesson from the earlier Deacon Puma study in the Grampians. One object called Geranium Springs Scat 2 was treated as important evidence for pumas because it contained large bone fragments. Zoologists warned it might actually be a regurgitated pellet. In an addendum, the study's own author later accepted that a wedge-tailed eagle pellet was the most likely explanation. That episode did not prove every later clue wrong. It showed how quickly an investigation can start interpreting ambiguous material through the animal it expects to find. Now look at the photographs, because this is where a normal cat can become enormous. A single image gives you shape in 2 dimensions. Size needs a trustworthy reference at roughly the same distance from the camera. Grass, fence posts, road edges, and tree trunks can help only when their dimensions and positions are known. A black animal, partly hidden by vegetation, is almost designed to defeat that judgment. Move the animal closer to the lens than the object you are using for scale, and the body can look dramatically larger. The Victorian Review did something more useful than guessing height from a silhouette. It compared anatomy. A feral domestic cat has pointed ears placed high on the head, a narrower neck, relatively slim forelimbs, smaller feet, and a proportionally shorter, softer-looking tail. A leopard carries a heavier front end, rounded ears set more to the sides, a thick square muzzle, powerful feet and forelimbs, a thickened neck, and a long cylindrical tail. The report reproduced one supposed black panther video still from central Victoria and identified the animal as a domestic cat from those proportions. That does not mean every distant black shape is easy to classify. In 2020, photographer Amber Nocita captured a large black cat near Mount Sabine in the Otways. The pictures reignited the panther debate, yet Nocita herself told ABC she assumed it was a really large feral cat. This is why eyewitness certainty cannot substitute for scale. A person can be completely sincere about seeing a huge animal and still have no calibrated measurement of its size. The camera records light. It does not automatically record meters. Distance estimation is especially fragile in bushland because the scene offers many false rulers. A tuft of grass may be closer to the camera than the cat. A track may curve away. A telephoto lens can compress depth, making separate objects appear to sit on the same plane. Unless the photographer returns to the location and measures the geometry, as big as a Labrador remains an impression rather than a measurement. Body proportions survive that problem better. Ears, muzzle, forelimbs, and tail are attached to the animal, so their ratios stay useful even when the absolute size is uncertain. There is also a psychological trap. Once the observer decides the animal is panther-sized, every familiar feature starts being read at panther scale. A domestic cat ear becomes a tiny ear on a giant head. A normal tail becomes a huge tail seen far away. The image has not changed, the assumed distance has. The feral cat explanation is less exotic, but it is not a trivial answer. Agriculture Victoria says feral cats occur widely across the state. Adult males normally weigh about 3.4 to 6.4 kilograms, averaging 4.5 kilograms, and black is one of the common coat colors. The 2012 review noted that scientific studies usually put wild domestic cats in roughly the 2 to 6 kilogram range, while also discussing exceptional large black individuals, such as the Kurt Engel animal. In good condition, a wild cat can develop substantial muscle around the head, neck, and shoulders. Put that animal in tall grass at dusk, remove a reliable scale reference, and give Sixit a long, uninterrupted stride across a track, and the visual ingredients of a panther are already present. But the review did not use feral cats as a magic eraser. It explicitly said some records were difficult to explain within the domestic cat model. The Longford footprints were one example. Some reported behaviors around livestock also appeared outside what investigators expected from known Victorian predators, and the Winchelsea DNA result was serious enough that the authors said preliminary DNA evidence could not be dismissed entirely. That is the resistance the case has to survive. If the official report admitted anomalies, why not leave the door wide open to leopards? Because an anomaly and a population are different claims. Strange footprints tell you a strange footprint exists. A questionable DNA fragment tells you a sample deserves better testing. A breeding population requires repeated independent, well-proven evidence that converges on the same species. The feral cat explanation does not need to solve every story. It only has to explain why so many panther-shaped reports keep appearing without producing the biological footprint a population of actual panthers should leave. Feral cats are also sold for exactly the places where these sightings happen. Agriculture. Victoria describes them as widespread, solitary, and difficult to estimate because of their cryptic behavior. They are commonly active around sunrise and sunset, the same low-light windows in which size and color are hardest to judge. Black fur adds another effect. In weak light, internal detail disappears first. The viewer sees a clean outline rather than shoulder, ribcage, and leg separation. That silhouette can look heavier and smoother than the animal really is. None of this requires witnesses to invent anything. It only requires an animal that is real, a viewing condition that is poor, and a cultural label already waiting for the shape. So what would finally prove Victoria's panther? The 2012 investigators were specific. They wanted primary evidence of unquestioned provenance. A carcass, skeletal material, diagnostic tissue, or DNA collected and handled in a way that rules out contamination and mislabeling. High-quality photographs with proven provenance could also become compelling, especially if they include reliable scale and diagnostic anatomy. And one carcass would still not prove a breeding population. The report explicitly noted that more than one specimen would be required, because a single escaped or released animal is a very different claim from a self-sustaining population living across Victoria. That is why unexplained is not the finish line. It is a label for evidence that has not yet earned an identification. 7. Victoria may contain unusually large black feral cats. It certainly contains thousands of stories about something larger. The State Review left a few cases open because science is supposed to leave weakly resolved cases open. But after more than a century of sightings, 24,000 museum specimens, more than 160 outstanding mammal records, sounds large camera trap datasets, and multiple attempts at genetic identification, the missing object is still the same: an exotic big cat with a clean chain of evidence. The report even recommended how a future investigation should work. Collect predator DNA from fresh livestock carcasses and scats, use agreed laboratories, train field officers to label and store samples properly, involve qualified veterinarians in forensic examination, and have a contingency plan ready if a non-domestic cat is actually detected. That is a very different standard from another blurry photograph. It creates a chain from the animal to the sample to the laboratory to a specimen or record that other researchers can inspect. Before you call the next black shape a panther, choose your standard. What single piece of evidence would you demand first? Put your test in the comments and subscribe to Bush Signal for the next case. Because a black cat can create a giant claim. But what happens when the physical evidence really does belong to an extinct Australian predator? That is where the next investigation begins. Why South Australia's new thylacine footprints are 100,000 years too late.